if we're going to throw all of those away, we need to replace them with something. And what I encourage people to think about is for this specific griever, their specific loss, and your relationship with them, right? That's where all the variety lives. My relationship with the person who's grieving, what they've lost, and how that's impacting them. And really just speak from your heart. If we can get to a place where we can put that fear aside and instead face this grief with love, which I know you talk about on your podcast, right? How do we do this all with love? Then we can come up with beautiful things to say to the person. And for me, the one thing that you say to that one person, that's the perfect thing to say. So the thing that's unique to your relationship to them, to their specific loss, to how they're managing, that's the perfect thing to say. And so you can't even come up with the perfect thing for you to say in every circumstance because it just doesn't work that way.
Hey friends, it's Mary, and this is the Mary Jervich Show, a podcast that champions today's working women to gain the clarity, confidence, and courage to up-level your career while strengthening your faith and living your dream life, all in record time. We'll cover topics like career advancement, leadership, personal development, faith, and health and wellness, so you can intentionally create a career and life full of more abundance, joy, and love. Let's get started. Hey friends, welcome on into this episode of the Mary Jervich Show. I'm so thankful that you're joining us here today. We never take it for granted that you're here. We have a wonderful guest joining us today, and we're talking about a subject that can feel heavy, but our guest today has just this way of helping to open things up and make us feel really wonderful. So I'm excited to have this conversation and for the opportunity for you to get to hear this conversation. The truth is we're all going to go through grief in our lives. It's part of the living process. If we are alive, then we will grieve. And our guest today, Suzanne Jabour, is a grieving mom, and she has found meaning in her loss through opening up conversations about grief, how it really works, and how we can support people experiencing it. So whether you are experiencing grief, you think you might be experiencing grief in the future, or maybe there's someone that you love in your life or a coworker in your life that is experiencing grief, then this conversation is going to be for you today. Suzanne works with organizations and businesses to help build the skills and protocols to better support people who are grieving and normalize grief as an expected and healthy part of our lives. She also works with grievers to chart their unique grief path. Suzanne, welcome on in. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Mary. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so grateful to hosts like you who are prepared to open up, as you said, this conversation, this topic that feels so heavy, but like we need to talk about it. So thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, right now in my personal life, we have lost just a couple people in my life through these COVID years. And I have some very near and dear family members to me that are either getting older in age and even some that are experiencing terminal illnesses. And so I felt like God had just kind of put this on my heart as a topic that I want to bring to the forefront. And I think part of it is, for myself, but I also know that as women and as people, we're faced with grief, whether it's at home or in the workplace, because it's a part of our lives. So Suzanne, I just thank you for taking your time to be here today. I'd love for the listeners just to get to learn more about you and kind of what brought you to this grief journey.
Yeah, thank you. I come to this grief journey sort of out of every parent's worst nightmare. I got that middle of the night phone call from the police to notify me that my son Ben had died. That was in September of 2020. He was 22. And that was exactly as devastating and life shattering and all the things. It's funny when people say, oh, I can't even imagine. I remember hearing someone in the very early days of my grief saying, the people who say they can't really imagine are actually the ones that kind of can imagine, but they don't want to because it's so terrifying. So, if you can imagine for a second what that might be like, it's exactly as terrifying and horrible as you think. And for me, it was really interesting. It wasn't my first grief journey. I had lost both of my parents. My dad died when I was in my 30s, actually when Ben was 4 months old. So that long ago, 22 years before Ben died. And my mom died when I was in my 40s. So it wasn't my first time. And I'm so weirdly grateful for that, navigating the loss of someone really close to me. But there's something about that out of order death. And there's something about, the loss of a child that's just next level. Like it just, really nothing in my life had adequately prepared me for what was coming. And I knew that really early. I knew
Yeah.
that, it was going to take every tool in my toolbox and everything I had ever thought I knew about myself and, the universe and others and everything, was all going to be called into question almost. Like grief is like this bright spotlight shone on your life. And for me, that's what it felt like anyway. There was all of a sudden nowhere to hide. Like all the stories I had told myself about, how my life worked and who I was and all that, like it's all gets like opened up for examination. And I felt really lucky in that I just had this knowing, I got this download very early that the only way I would survive it was if I could stay conscious and curious. So, what that
Mhm.
meant was that I had to be conscious to all of the emotions. We're all so schooled and taught, right from a very young age,
Right.
especially those like bad emotions, which is a whole different problem, that paradigm of good emotions and bad emotions. In grief, the vast majority of the ones coming at you in that tsunami are the ones on that bad list. And I couldn't shut them out. I couldn't put them in a box. I couldn't tamp them down. Whatever skills we're using to put on a brave face, I couldn't do any of that. I was just a shattered hot mess. So it was staying conscious to all of it and just turning towards it instead of away, which is mostly what we want to do with grief is just turn away, turn away. We're so scared. And the curiosity was about, in those early days, really, when you're laying curled up in a ball sobbing on the couch, the curiosity is about how do I breathe? Like when you're sobbing so hard that you can't gasp a breath, like, how do I breathe? Like I need to breathe. How do I do that?
Right.
And, over time, the curiosity has expanded now really to be about how can I take this horrible thing that happened to me and obviously to Ben and have it not be for nothing. So, how can I use what I've learned because I've had to become a student of grief for my own survival? How can I use what I've learned to help other people who are grieving? And how can I use what I've learned about how we don't really show up to support each other to help shift that conversation? Because I really have come to see that one of the opportunities grief gives us is a space for really deep connection. Because if we can show up for the people who are grieving, you create bonds in those moments of vulnerability and messiness and just, the chaos that is those early days, especially that I really think are life changing. And I think, especially right now, when we're all feeling so much fear, so much uncertainty, I see so much unexpressed grief, as you mentioned in this past 3 years, so many of us have lost people or multiple people, and we've all lost all the other kinds of things that we kind of as a collective don't kind of assess as being worthy of grief. But they all need to be grieved, right? So all the losses of graduations and weddings and events and museums and, square dancing or pickleball or music or whatever you did to kind of fill your cup, we lost all of that for a while, and we're not acknowledging that that's a loss that needs to be grieved, that we need to acknowledge and feel our way through. So that's now really become my mission. What can I do in this lifetime? I say it's my cathedral project, right? Because grief will
Mhm.
not be normalized in my lifetime, but I'm going to do everything I can to start to help lay that foundation and build those walls and, get up to the bell tower, right? Because we need to. It's so desperately needed, especially in this moment. And we're all scared. When I ask people in surveys or in workshops, what holds you back from showing up for someone that you care about who's grieving? What makes you not go and help them or say something? It's almost universally fear because we don't want to do the wrong thing and we don't want to hurt the person and we don't want to make it worse. We get all caught up then in not knowing what to do and then we end up not doing anything. And now everyone's feeling isolated and confused. And I just don't think it needs to be that way. So the more we can talk about it and normalize it, imagine if we talked about grief the same way we talk about what we binged on Netflix over the weekend, right? If it was that normal a part of our
Right.
conversation that we could express those emotions and be witnessed in those emotions and feel the feelings, that I think would be, globally transformational, right? Certainly in my culture, we don't talk about that stuff, and I think many cultures are the same, that we just don't talk about it. So that's become my mission. So here we are to talk about it. Thank you so much.
Well,
And
I
then
have to
everyone
tell you,
who's feeling awkward can just listen.
Well, I love you. I just love you because here you are. It's only been a couple of years. You've experienced this great loss. It doesn't make the loss any less, but you are finding a way to, and I hear like the genuine joy in your voice talking about a subject. And I feel like this is maybe the transformation that we need because so much of it is filled with sorrow and sadness. And I feel like that is okay.
Yeah.
But to hear you come from a place of such, it just feels like you've done so much work to really work through and process by what you said, leaning in to where you were at instead of trying to escape it or avoid it or ignore it. You really leaned into that because I just, looking at your face, I can see like joy. And it's not because of what you've been through, but you're going to have to keep teaching us because this is just so incredible. But you've talked about so many things, and we are very sorry for your losses, but we are so
Thank
grateful
you.
for the mission and the work that you're doing because of this. And so you said so many different things. So I've got just a couple of things I wanted to kind of touch on here. But the one thing you said, I'll just go here first because this is the shortest, but you said the fear. We have a fear of not knowing what to say or saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the same fear. It just like is a parallel in different areas of our lives that stops us from living our best lives. We do the same thing in our career advancement. We have
Yep.
fear, so we don't take the actions. The same thing when we think about relationships, whether it be with friends or a significant other over the years, we don't put ourselves out there for that fear. And so we don't allow ourselves, but then we also can't experience the goodness in that. And what you said with the grief is that connection. So I want to definitely unpack that here in a second of how we can better support people for sure. The other thing you mentioned though, because you've had the unfortunate experience of losing your parents and then your son, you mentioned this out of order
Mm-hmm.
death or grief that you have to experience. Can you kind of just unpack that for a little bit and help us to understand, because you've went through this, how it is different, what it's different, how just anything you think we should know about that. And maybe we could talk about even the support we would give to different people in different situations.
For me, I lost my dad in my 30s when I had a toddler and an infant. I was nowhere near ready to lose my dad. And yet we grow up knowing we're going to outlive our parents. Like that's just a part of our
Mhm.
collective story about how life is supposed to work. So as much as for me, it was far too early, it was too early for my mom to die when I was in my 40s, right? It's still, I would love if I was thinking about that this morning. I'm like, how old would they be if they were still here? Oh, they would be quite elderly at this point. They'd be in their 80s and that'd be interesting to navigate. But there's something still about that sense of, your grandparents are supposed to go first and then your parents, and then you are then the elder of the family, right? Your generation becomes the elders of the family and there's a generation below you. And, it's all supposed to happen in this kind of orderly way. And we know that none of our life actually happens in that orderly way. And of course, grief doesn't either. But there's something about that out of order sense of it that
Yeah.
for me, it disrupted my life more. It upended everything and kind of broke everything apart more. Because I think, there's a saying about, when you lose your parents, you lose your past. When you lose your spouse, you lose your present. And when you lose your child, you lose your future.
Oh,
And there's something about that
wow.
really rang true for me because we envision our children as kind of carrying on our legacy. And this is all story, right? None of this necessarily is going to play out as reality, but the story of how life is supposed to go is that your children are part of your legacy. It's in your children that you live on. We put all of this kind of
Yeah.
expectation on what our children are going to, how they fulfill kind of that family
Mhm.
lineage idea. And so when that's taken away, for me, that was really upending and disorienting in a way that I hadn't experienced in the grief that I felt for my parents. And I think the other thing about it is the cognitive dissonance. So, because that doesn't make any sense, like when we think logically, it makes no sense in a logical way that your child would die before you. It doesn't make any sense in our,
Right.
especially in our developed Western culture where we have, robust healthcare, our maternal mortality rates are relatively low. our child survival rates are high. In our version of reality, it doesn't make any sense. So the cognitive dissonance of that, I found really, I was going to say alarming. That was the word that was coming out of my mouth. And that's probably actually quite accurate for those early acute, those very first acute days where your brain is madly trying to make sense of the nonsensical. That's what it felt like. I thought, like, I'm just trying to make sense of the nonsensical. And so that part of it was really more disruptive in my capacities, in my ability to just like hold it together than I had found when either of my parents died. And I think that that's interesting that you talk about, is there a different way we could support people depending on the kind of loss that they've had? And in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. And I guess the reservation I would have is in sort of saying, oh, well, this person will need more support because of the kind of loss that they had. I think that's probably universally true with the loss of a child. But there's also this weird stratification we have of losses and ones that are sort of worthy of grief and ones that aren't. And my argument, of course, is that every loss is worthy of grief. And how you're going to experience that and how it's going to manifest externally, the internal and external will be different every time. So that's my hesitation in saying, oh, yeah, like we should support this person more than the other person, because I don't think that's particularly healthy. Though I will tell you, a parent mourning the loss of a child is going to need more support. Both can be true.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you for your honesty. That's exactly what we need, because like my grandma's 100 years old. She's
Wow.
going to pass at some time. It would seem like a very normal part of life. She's lived an amazing life, right? So it would feel like, although we would be grieving her loss and maybe different for her siblings versus me as a grandchild, it is still a loss. And so, but whenever you lose somebody unexpectedly or somebody that hasn't been sick, it just feels different from the outside looking in. But I love that you give us that understanding that the grief is the grief. And so we don't have to address it in a different way. And when you were saying that, the other thing that kind of just popped up is I think we oftentimes have this habit of looking through our own lens and our own perspective at things. And so we would say, well, how bad would it be if I lost this person? And we don't know because we haven't actually experienced it, but we're like imagining it. And so we're creating those different levels of loss, but it's all such a great loss. So I just really appreciate you sharing that so candidly. I think that's really great. So I absolutely love that you work with workplaces, organizations, businesses, because I think this is so crucial. But why does it matter how we address grief in the workplace?
There's a bunch of reasons. And I'm going to save my anecdote so we're recording this. I'm not sure when it'll air, but we're recording it the day after Mother's Day. So I'm going to tell you my Mother's Day story at the end. Why it matters is that grievers need support and grievers are at work. So we need to support them at work. And I think especially when we're talking about, you had a wonderful podcast about how we show how we value people, which was such a great episode. And I thought it linked so much to what my message is. When people feel seen and heard and valued, that's how we're building loyalty. That's how we increase our retention numbers. So if we're only going to look at it from the sort of business bottom line kind of perspective, it matters around retention. It matters around retention for staff and for customers. So one of the interesting things that happens among grievers is we all compare notes. So, I was talking with a friend the other day who sadly recently lost his daughter, and he was talking about which companies were super helpful and which companies were impossible to deal with. So I now know which companies I will happily support and which companies I won't, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that sort of double-edged place where it shows up. It's also important with staff because most companies want to create a culture where people feel valued, right? Where they feel like they're an important part of the team. And there's a lot of workplaces where emotions are not a part of that conversation.
Right.
We're a little bit past that, like, we'll leave your feelings at the door. We've moved from there, but we're also not, for most places, not at bring your feelings fully to the table. Because that's a little bit scary. We worry that people will bring big feelings that they don't know how to self-regulate through, and then we're just all not getting anything done. In reality, the opposite is true, right? If you're in a place as a griever where you can grieve at work. Now, I was a griever who was very comfortable grieving out loud. For me, that was the only way I was going to survive. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is grievers who want to come to work almost as a respite from their grief. So they can come to work, they can feel productive, they can feel connected to the rest of the world. They feel a sense of like, this is what normal life feels like. And then they go home and be a hot mess. So you kind of have that whole spectrum of folks. One of the things that happens in grief is we get really, well, for some of us, really intense. My brain fog was really intense. It's less intense for some, but somewhere along the way, we're going to have issues with sleep, with eating, with routine, with brain fog. There's some really predictable symptoms that will happen to most grievers in some way at some point. So if we can have strategies in place for them to be able to tap into that people know about ahead of time, then they can show up and get the support that they need to stay, to remain a valued part of the team and to stay successful at work. And the other ripple effect of that is that if you're showing your entire staff that you care about this person who's struggling and you're actively, we're working as a team to actively support them, then when other people are struggling, that's also okay. Because whether it's grief or some other kind of struggle, we all have moments in life where we're struggling. It's part of our journey, right? It's part of how we grow. It's part of all kinds of things. And so if we've created a workplace where that's allowed, where you can struggle and be successful at the same time, because we're all here to help each other, then that's up leveling, right? Your workplace culture around, psychological safety, emotional agility, all of those things that we know are really critical at work and we're trying to figure out how to do them. There's an interesting lens to learn about how to do them when we talk about grief, because it is such a universal experience. So it's something we all have a sense of. So we can use that as a lens to get at some of these more sort of ethereal and esoteric feeling things, because we can talk about it at a really practical level. We can talk about, our emotional agility and skills that we need to be able to show up and talk to someone thoughtfully. We can talk about our vulnerability that we need when we're going to have this awkward conversation that we're feeling uncomfortable about. And then we can talk about really practical, like how can we scaffold for this person? What's on our menu of support that they can access, and how do we support them? Right? Maybe like I didn't do my own grocery shopping for about a year and a half. I just could not face the grocery store. It was an impossible task. So maybe they're struggling with feeding themselves. Well, what if you had a rotating lunch deal? So everyone brought, on Monday, I brought 2 lunches. On Tuesday, Mary Jo brought 2 lunches. On Wednesday, Frank brought 2 lunches. And on Thursday, Sally brought 2 lunches. And then our grievers being fed every day, and they don't have to think about it. So there's really practical, simple things we can do that actually end up helping everyone. So when you're looking at shared calendars and breaking down tasks and, project management, if you're looking at that from a brain fog perspective too, then, and especially now with technology, we can share everything, right? We can have shared calendars and shared documents. It's all so easy to do. All of those things, all of that, that would support a griever also helps everyone else. Because if we're not all trying to remember boring, silly things like when is the meeting, when is the deadline, we're freeing up all that mental capacity for creative problem solving, which is really what most of us want our staff to be doing anyway. So there's huge ripple effects when you kind of look at it from this holistic perspective through the lens of how do we support a griever.
Yeah, I love that. And as you were mentioning all of these different things, all these different scenarios and times that I have witnessed other people losing people and what that experience was like. And, it was unique because I already said it, but I'm going to say it again because I just love that you go into organizations and you teach them this, because whether we've experienced grief or we haven't, we still don't know. Because here's the thing, what you just said, we're all processing it in different ways. There's the person that can't go into the office, and then there's the person that goes into the office. And I've seen both. And there was an instance where one time the griever was the person that was going into the office, and this is a very high level senior person. And I was at the point where I'm like, it's unique, because now thinking about this, being like, you really need to, your father has passed. You need to take some time off. You need to take a step away, because you are setting an example for what is acceptable for the rest of the team to do. Because this is a small team. It's like, if you lose somebody so important and you can't step away for a day, what is that showing to others? But when you were saying this, I'm like, no, they can show up. They can work, perhaps, if that's the thing they need to do. But at the same time, if it is that senior of a level of person, then it can be addressed with the team and just say, guys, I know that I'm here because this is what I need. I just want you to fully understand, if you lose somebody, like this, I would fully expect and understand if you didn't act the same way as I do, and this place
Yeah.
wasn't a place where you could be. But that the thought of that conversation never occurred to me before, but I'm just like, oh gosh, this could be detrimental. If you just act like Iron Man, like this is not good. Like this is not good. Like they need to know that if and he was always so good whenever people had sick members of their family, or they lost someone, or they even lost a pet. So he was very good with allowing
Yeah.
them to grieve in their own ways. But it just really made me
Yeah.
think of that instance where it was like,
Of course. Well, yeah, especially when it's a senior management or a senior part of the team and everyone's looking at that as the exemplar, right? It's like, and that's a lot of pressure on a griever too. We don't want to be the example for anybody. Like we just want to just be able to do our thing. But it's also really powerful to think about having those conversations ahead of time. Like, what if we had those conversations ahead of time as a team? Especially right now, it's easy. Okay, I was going to say it's easy to talk about grief. It's never easy to talk about grief, but most of us are feeling some grief right now. So there's a moment that's being presented to us where everyone can understand what we're talking about. And if you're having those conversations ahead of time as a team, then you can bring those kind of things up, right? And say, if you're the kind of person where if you get there and the thing that gives you comfort is being here and feeling connected to us and feeling, supported and like you're feeling that part of your normal life is still accessible to you, we'd love to support you in that. And there's ways we can help and scaffold and, look at your task load and all that kind of stuff, all those really practical things. And if you're the kind of person where that seems unimaginable, then let's figure out either how much time off you need or how you work a hybrid at home, at work, all at home, whatever it is. And if people know ahead of time that all those things are possible, that takes a huge onus off the griever as well. Because when you're, especially in those early days, to try and advocate, to go into your boss and advocate for yourself is a big ask for someone who's in that level of like swirl and cognitive dissonance and you barely know which way is up and you're trying to figure out how to breathe, right? To then have to go in and say, oh, I think I need, like, we can't conceptualize that. That's too much to ask of grievers. So I like to think of it as being kind of a menu that grievers could pick from. So every company is going to be different what you would offer, but here's the menu, welcome back to work. We're so sorry for your loss. We could talk about much more, robust things to say than that, but we can all say those things. Here's the menu. What can we do to support you this week? What of these things would you, and if we're offering, generally people will take it. If they have to ask, most of the time it will never happen. So that offer is also huge too. And the message that sends to the rest of your organization is huge. When I'm in crisis, I'm going to get offered support beyond, 2 days off and 3 free counseling sessions with the employee assistance program or whatever you have in place, which we know for grief is not enough. It's a great, I'm thrilled that people have anything, but it's not enough. So how can you do it in a way that it's an offer? And if they say no, that's fine. It has to all be griever centered, right? It has to all be their option. But if we're offering, then they get to say, oh, I'm really struggling with X this week. Can we figure out how to deal with that? Great. And we'll meet again next week and see what you need then. So there's constant follow up. It's just a normal part of how the office works because grief is a normal part of how our life works.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about this. Let's dive in and let's talk about how we can help all grievers in our lives. And then let's talk about specific ways that we can support them at work. So yes, we're having this conversation, but then what is on that menu? What does that look like? What, maybe our company doesn't have one of these programs. So really, what can we do? But let's just start with all grievers. How can we support them?
Yeah. So the most common conversations that I have with people are around what to say. Because that's where we start, right? What on earth are we supposed to say? And I wish I had come up with the perfect one size fits all. Here's the sentence and a half that you could say to everyone and it would be perfect. Unfortunately, grief doesn't work that way. So what I encourage people to do is to really think about all those old cliches and platitudes that you've heard forever, that we all have a sense of not being particularly helpful anymore. And we need to throw all of those away. If we're going to throw all of those away, we need to replace them with something. And what I encourage people to think about is for this specific griever, their specific loss and your relationship with them, right? That's where all the variety lives. My relationship with the person who's grieving, what they've lost and how that's impacting them. And really just speak from your heart. If we can get to a place where we can put that fear aside and instead face this grief with love, which I know you talk about on your podcast, right? How do we do this all with love? Then we can come up with beautiful things to say to the person. And for me, the one thing that you say to that one person, that's the perfect thing to say. So the thing that's unique to your relationship to them, to their specific loss, to how they're managing, that's the perfect thing to say. And so you can't even come up with the perfect thing for you to say in every circumstance, because it just doesn't work that way. So when I do an exercise in workshops for people supporting a griever, where I ask them to think about someone they've supported in the past, where maybe they didn't, or they know they just didn't quite say what they wish they had. We all have that scenario, right? We've all been there and done that. And then think about what you would say to that person if you had it to do, if you got that do over and you got to go in with no fear, with no expectation, with a whole lot of vulnerability and messiness, what would you say? And the things people come up with, Mary, are so beautiful. I had one woman in a workshop, and I will not get the words right because they're theirs, not mine. They were her words, but she was thinking of a specific griever she was quite close to. And she said, what she would say is, I don't know what to do, and I don't know what to say to support you, and I love you. And however long this takes, I'm here to walk beside you. And I just thought, but that's the
That's
kind of thing
beautiful.
people come up with, right? I wouldn't necessarily
Yeah.
say that to whatever random griever. I hope I would say something as beautiful, right? But if you can get to that space where you just say what's true for you, I fully believe it's absolutely okay to acknowledge how horrible it is, to acknowledge the person. It's really helpful for most grievers to talk about the person they've lost. So if you have a memory that you want to share, for me, I'm 2.5-ish years out from when Ben died. And I love when people say, oh my gosh, I saw this thing yesterday. A friend did it to me the other day. She saw a young man walking down the street Ben had quite long hair and he was very fashionable. And this person was fashionable in a different way than Ben would have been. She described the outfit this person was wearing. And I thought, oh my gosh, Ben would have just been horrified. But this person had committed to their look and they were doing it. And that made her think of him. So she messaged me and said, oh my gosh, I saw this person walking down the street today. It made me think of Ben. That's a gift to me. To know that other people also still think of him. I'm still thinking of him. You're not going to remind me that he died. I hear that sometimes too. People are scared they're going to remind the person that if they say something, they'll remind them and make them sad. They remember and they're probably sad. So we just need to release all of that. If you didn't know the person, it's really one of the most beautiful things someone said to me in the early days. She came over, one of my coworkers, to say, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I just don't even know what to say. And I didn't know him. What do you wish I knew about him? And I thought that was really beautiful too, because it gave me a chance to go, oh yes, I'm in the depths of despair missing this person. And they were an amazing, astonishing human. And I get to share that part of my grief instead of just the despair part. So there's a bunch of ways that we can do it I will have a soft spot in my heart for that coworker forever, because
Right.
so many people didn't say anything. So many people stammered out, I'm so sorry, and then turned tail and ran away. And I never talked about it again. And she had that level of vulnerability to be able to say, I don't know what to say, and I didn't know him. So could you tell me about him? That was beautiful. So for me, the what to say part is all about getting past the fear, leaning into the love, eyes wide open courage, because it's going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel scared anyway. So just accept that. It's going to be messy and it's not going to be perfect. Oh, well, grief is messy. The person who's grieving, they're full on and messy. They don't even recognize messiness from not messiness because they're just all in messy. So if you can come in and just speak from the heart and say something genuine and heartfelt, that's really beautiful and creates that connection that we were talking about. When it comes to what to do, so if that sounds
I
terrifying,
want to just speak
okay,
into
go
that
ahead.
for just a minute because
Yeah.
there were so many good points there. And so what I'm hearing you say is say something and just say
Yes.
something from the heart. And if you're still like, I don't know what to say, I just love what you said is the memories. And because that's the one thing you are thinking about them. And like, I've lost one of my cousins and I think about him often and I think about his sister and
Mm-hmm.
his mom. I think about them often. I don't see them often because we live, across the country. But I think just reaching out sometimes, and whether it's sharing a photo, sharing a memory, like there's a picture I have where my little boy's in it. It's one of my favorite pictures of my cousin because my little boy's right there. And
Oh,
it's
nice.
just, yeah. So, but I think it's just sharing these things and not being afraid to, like you said, because that never occurred to me. Like, Of course, you haven't forgotten. Of course, you're thinking of that person, and it's not going to make you have a bad day. It actually makes your day better because there's other people that are still remembering the good and the joy and keeping that legacy of them going on. And so I never looked at it that way because I think that just is that flip we need to transition that fear into saying, no, you thought of this person today. You should just send a little message, or it's okay to talk about the person, because it's not that you have to talk about them constantly, but it's okay to talk about them because that's an important part of your life and of her life. And
Yeah.
yeah, the
And
memories keep them
certainly,
alive.
yeah, absolutely. And that to me, and to most grievers that I talk with, that's a gift, right? To know that other people are still thinking about your person, that's a gift, right? To know that they had that
Yeah.
impact, that their life meant something to people other than just you. And certainly if the person who's grieving says, oh, I don't want to talk about it today, or I can't even imagine. I was going to say, if they said, never mention their name again. Like, I just get, like, when you think about it that way, when you start to language the other side, like to imagine what that other side would be, I can't even imagine a griever who would say, I never want to talk about them. And I'm sure they're out there. And that's where it needs to be griever centered. So if you did that to someone when they had said, oh, I'm thinking about you, I had this great memory of Ben, and they said, oh, it really hurts me to hear other people talk about him, then that's not going to be how you support them. But for the vast majority of grievers, that gives us comfort. Like 99.9. If you hit the 0.1, let it be led by them. But for most of us, that's wildly comforting.
Yeah. Okay. I love it. I love it. So now what can we do for them? So we
Okay.
talked about what we can say. So what can we do?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and if saying something sounds terrifying, please feel free to lean into, I'm so sorry, and then move on to doing something. Okay. And then we'll all build that emotional intelligence and that vulnerability muscle as we practice. So the doing is really interesting because most grievers need really practical support, like super practical things. Like I said, other people did my grocery shopping and my cooking for a really, really long time. What I suggest to people is if there's something you love to do, offer to do that. What most of us say is anything that you need, I'm here for you, just let me know, which is lovely. And what we need to understand from the griever's perspective is when you're in those earliest days, especially, and even then through early grief, which for me lasts about 2 years. So if you think about early grief being about 2 years as we move towards integration, it's definitely not a year. It's definitely like nothing ends after the service. So we need to expand our sense of how long this takes. To just say, oh, I'm here for you. Anything you need, let me know. I can't conceptualize what I might need to be able to ask. So a very specific offer is the key. So something you love to do, offer to do that. That's great. I have one woman I was working with was supporting a griever who hated the color of her bedroom, like the paint color. And this
Yeah.
person I was working with loves painting, like loves painting walls. She just loves painting the house. So I said to her, well, what if you offered to paint her room for her? Like, what if you said to her, do you know what color you want? I'll go pick it up and I'll come on this weekend and I'll paint your room for you. What do you think would happen? She was like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. I said, if that was me, I would be grateful forever. Right. And that's what she ended up doing. Like, that's transformational for a griever who's struggling with sleep and you're going into this bedroom that gives you anxiety because the color on the walls is so terrible. Go paint their room. That's not what you're necessarily going to do for everyone. But a specific offer of something you're good at. Do you love gardening? Offer. It's springtime. Offer summer. Offer to go help in the garden. Do you love, some people love grocery shopping. Bless them. They've grocery shopped for me for years. But if it's something you're doing anyway, is a really great offer too. So what if you said to the griever, I'm headed to the grocery store. Do you need milk? They will know if they need milk. And if they don't need milk, that might trigger them to know they need bread or whatever it is, broccoli, we should all eat more fruits
Yeah.
and vegetables, right? Maybe we need apples. Or you could say, I'm going to the grocery store. Go open your fridge and tell me what you need, and I'll bring it to you this afternoon. So really specific offers, right? If it's someone in your neighborhood that you don't know all that well, I bet you know what day is garbage day. And for most grievers, we have no idea what day it is. So what if you said to them as you dropped off cookies or a card or flowers, whatever it is, when I'm taking my garbage out, would it be okay with you if I snuck in your backyard and took your garbage out for you too on Thursdays, whatever day it is? That's a super helpful offer. That's not hard for you to do, helps the griever immensely. So really specific offers around practical things. Childcare, I can't even imagine navigating something like this. I did it with my dad. I mean, when my dad died, Ben was 4 months old and my daughter had just turned 4. Bless those friends that showed up in my life and took my kids and got them to preschool and like did all the things because I couldn't do it all. It was impossible. So childcare offers, carpooling offers, all of those really practical kinds of things. If it's someone who's living a similar life to you, which we all tend to have around us, people around the same age with the same kind of circumstances, think of stuff that you're doing that you could offer to do for them while you're doing it for yourself. Easy peasy.
Well, that's such great advice. And I like the way that you told us to just tell them the thing that we can do, because I know that's when somebody's sick or when somebody's going through something, that's the thing, right? And I say it wholeheartedly, whatever you need, don't hesitate to ask. Like, I'm here, like, and I really mean that. Whatever it is,
Yes.
I will come and help you. I don't care if it's picking up after your dog in your backyard or running
Right.
your kids around or doing your laundry or, just coming over and sitting with you, whatever the thing is that you need. I really, really mean that. But I think that it can be hard, and it's probably easier, if we just say it. And I could see these times where it's like, okay, I knew what to do, because I think, right, we're talking about grief, but we can also put this, you just think of all the times when people need help, whenever there's a sickness, whether it's terminal or not, there's these times, because the grief process can start probably before the person's even passed. And so there's those times. And then I just even think back to when I had my baby, it's like, well, look at all the help I got then, like, you know what I mean? And so just to think like how helpful that was to really open up our minds to say, okay, what could we do? And not feeling like we have to do everything, but just do something, because that's going to make the person know that they're cared for and supported. Like, I once had a neighbor and her husband was terminal and he ended up passing. And I just told my lawn guys, I'm like, do their yard too. Like, just do both of them.
I love that.
And I just took care of that, because they didn't need to spend their time doing those types of things. But it never even occurred to me that that was the thing. It's like, just do it, or tell them what it is you're going to do. Not that they can't say, no, I really don't want you to do that, but they'll be a lot less likely to, and more, not that they wouldn't accept your help otherwise. Because I think that's the thing, like the way you're explaining it is people do need help. Even if you say, just let me know how I can help, I'm willing to help in any ways, they're likely not to take you up on that. But if you say, hey, I'm going to be taking the trash out, I'd love to just grab your bins too, if that's not a problem.
Is that okay?
Like, most people are not going to be like, no, that's a problem, you cannot take my trash out. Most of them will be like, oh, that would be great. Right? Like that would be great, because it's something so small, but it's one less thing they have to worry about and think about. And so I love that idea of it being something specific. And I also love it being something that you love. And I think that's really important, because sometimes we tend to do the same things for people, but maybe it isn't something that you love, or maybe a group of people are doing something, but it's not something that you love or you're good at. That can make you probably even hesitant there. So finding that thing.
Yeah. And I love what you were talking about, all the support that shows up when you have a baby. Right? It's so fascinating to compare the two ends of life. So if you think about all the support that shows up from you, really right from when you announce that you're pregnant, or when people can tell. Random strangers come up to you to offer support in the grocery store when you are carrying a baby, right? We've all had that kind of really a little bit weird, but that experience of the community collective kind of rallying around you. And when you've had the baby, everybody shows up to help, and people are doing all these practical things for you. And at the other end, we hold all this fear. And so we don't. And so what if we could make those two experiences more similar, right? What if the expectation was at both ends, when the life arrives and when the life leaves, the people that are impacted by that need support, and they need practical support. They need emotional support. I have one brilliant friend just kept dragging me out of the house. She's like, you need to go for a walk. We're going for a walk. I'm coming at 2:00 and I'm taking you out of the house. And I was like, she didn't give me any choice. She did not follow any of my instructions about choice and grief and tenderness. She just came and dragged me out of the house, which was brilliant. But it is that sense of like, what if we showed up the same way, with that same open-heartedness? We're obviously showing up with joy at one end and sorrow at the other. But both of those are valuable emotions. Both of them are important life experiences. And both of them are points in our life where we can connect with each other. And we're missing one. We've dropped one off because we're scared. And we can be scared and do it anyway. That's courage, right? Eyes wide open courage. I'm terrified I'm going to do the wrong thing, but I'm going to do it anyway.
So let me ask you this, because I know there's been times in my life where somebody has passed and I have every good intention of doing something. It could even just be sending a card or saying
Mhm.
something. And, we're all going through our own experiences too. At one point, I had 5 people that had cancer, and it was like I couldn't support all of them. And so some of them I didn't support. I didn't feel like I supported at all because it was like, it was almost so overwhelming for me, which is, whatever, that's my
Mhm.
excuse. We'll just call it that. But is there a period of time where it's like, because I'm still thinking about it. There's one person I didn't even acknowledge that this person passed. It's not like they're this close friend to me. They're this very distant, we'll just call them a very distant family relative that I'm not related to by blood. But I never even sent a card, right? And now it's been years. But at what point is it like, is it too long to acknowledge it, not acknowledge it? Is it still worth acknowledging? Like, because I feel like sometimes time passes because we get stuck in this fear. Maybe somebody listening now is like, oh my gosh, somebody had something happen 4 months ago or 5 months ago or 6 months ago. And here I am just like, I don't know what to do. And so I've been in the fear mode and I don't want to just go take their trash out. But so what does
Right.
that time look like?
Because that would feel weird.
Yeah.
So I actually think it's never too late, right? As with every other sort of mistake or thing we've done that we really wish we had done better, I don't think there's an expiration date. I think you get to go back and say, "Oh my gosh, I was thinking about you and I still hold in my heart, this moment that I feel like I didn't show up for you and I'm so sorry I didn't. And please know this entire time I've been thinking about you." What if you
Mm.
said something like that?
Yeah,
It's
I
that
think
vulnerability
that
piece,
sounds
right?
really
We feel
beautiful.
so awkward and we feel so much like we didn't do it right and so now we can't do anything at all because it's too late. If you're within that 2 years of early grief, I say go for it, and I'm happy to be your excuse, right? I was listening to this podcast the other day and this woman was talking about grief support and I realized I dropped the ball and I'm really sorry. And what would have said to you at the time is, I am so sad this is happening to you. This is absolutely terrible. I wish I could fix it, but I know I can't. Whatever you would say, right? Your own words from, back to your own words from your heart. It's okay to have made a mistake and own up to it. I think that's beautiful. Because if we're operating out of love and not out of fear, love says, reach out. Love says, make the
Mm.
connection. Fear says, they're going to be mad about it. They're going to feel judgmental about it. They're going to think it's too late. Fear is a whole story we're making up about how the person's going to respond. None of which is true because we haven't even tried yet, right? And if they respond to you and say, wow, you weren't there for me at the time and I'm cutting you out of my life, well, at least you have your answer, right? You don't have to muse about it anymore. But they're not going to. They still know their person died. They remember every day. They will love that you remember too. And it's okay to say, oh, I really dropped the ball and I'm sorry. And now I know better. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to do better. And so I'm reaching out. Anniversary dates are a great moment to do that, right? There's so many opportunities if you think about it through the year to reach out to a griever. Mother's Day just happened. That's a whole, thing for people. Father's Day is coming, birthdays, their birthday, their loved one's birthday, the death anniversary is another time you can reach out. There's a multiple times throughout the year that if you dropped the ball the first time, you get a do-over, right? What if you sent them a card or a text message or something?
So we talked about all the things that we can say, some things that we can do. So is there anything specific at work that's different? Because I know you said, okay, have these weekly check-ins to see what they need. What does that look like? What are some of the things that might be on a menu that we would consider doing for people? What does that really look like?
So what the menu to me would look, and it's different with every company because your company culture is different, what you do is different, what people's jobs are is different. So it's going to be different everywhere. But what I would say to be the most aware of is the brain fog. That's the thing that for most of us is the most impactful at work, and the emotions. So I love the idea of a space to go when you're overwhelmed that is not a bathroom stall. I don't know about you, but I've cried way too many times in a bathroom stall because that was the only private place to go. So a quiet place to go when you're overwhelmed, which I think should be a permanent part of every office space. Every workplace should have a quiet corner like we do when we're in kindergarten. Why we think we need it as toddlers and we don't need it as grown-ups, I'm not sure where we got told that story, but everybody needs a quiet space to go. So a quiet place to go when you're overwhelmed, where everybody just understands that's like, I don't care what you call it, overwhelmed corner. I need a break corner. Don't care. Doesn't matter. But we just know that you go there when you need a moment. It doesn't need any fanfare. You don't need attention. You don't need someone to come and help you. You just need to go away for a moment, gather yourself however you need, and then you'll come back. That's a brilliant thing to have in a workplace. And then other things on the menu would be things like a shared calendar. So where someone else is responsible for putting the dates, the appointments, the dates, the deliverables, all that kind of stuff on a shared calendar is really helpful. Grief messes with your relationship with time. So anything related to time that you can support is really great. If it's someone who you don't need to be at their desk at a given time, like some jobs you need them to, like the store is going to open, you have to be there. That's different.
Right.
If it's a job where you can offer flexibility around time, that's really helpful. Like, does it matter all that much if they're 10 minutes late every day? Probably not. But them knowing that that's okay takes a huge level of stress off. Because I'm going to tell you, having a shower for me that's supposed to take, 5 minutes took 25 because you're standing there going, what do I do in this space? Oh, I shower. Okay. Hair. Did I shampoo yet? Like it takes forever. It's preposterous. But that's really when you're in that deep brain fog, how it works. Support around eating can be really helpful. So maybe one of the things on the menu is lunch support. Maybe one of the things on the menu is a walking partner, like a walking buddy, where you can come and just tap on their shoulder and they get up and you go for a walk outside for 10 minutes, right? Maybe one of the things on the menu is actually taking tasks off their plate, right? The team pitching in and everyone doing a little bit extra so they get a bit of a break. And the thing I would caution about all of these things is they need regular review because a lot of people really get comfort at work and they want as quickly as they can to get back to full capacity. So what do you need this week? Let's review it next week. Because the idea is we put it's like you're building a building, right? We put a lot of scaffolding up at the beginning, but that's not going to stay there forever. Eventually, we want the building to stand on its own. So we want to put in place this system of robust support at the beginning, and then we can slowly start to take those things away or replace them. Like if you think about it, if you make a construction analogy, right at the beginning, you're laying the foundation, you need the cement trucks, and then you're going to start to put up walls, you need scaffolding, you need, then you're going to take the scaffolding down, you're going to put up something different. We need cranes. Like it's that sense of we're trying to help this person rebuild themselves. They're going to rebuild themselves. They're going to rebuild their life. They're rebuilding how they operate at work. Because for many of us, I know for me, the person I was that went to bed on September 25th, that person doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That version of me literally does not exist. I became an entirely new person. So how do we set it up so that as they're figuring out who this new person is, if it's that level of a loss of identity that comes with their grief, that they have some support to do that. And not every grief brings that loss of identity, but sometimes it does. So all of that scaffolding goes to place, and then you just can slowly take it away so that they come back to the place where they are fully successful. They're fully part of the team. They're doing all of their tasks and they're not being scaffolded. But that would be the kinds of things. So calendaring is really important. For me, one of the things that happened with my brain fog and still, plagues me to this day, if we're going to be dramatic about it, is, sequential tasking. So I need to do A and then B and then C and then D. I can't remember D. So I can get from A to B, but then I'm lost, right? So breaking tasks out and documenting them, that's easy. And that helps everybody, right? Because then we're all looking at the same thing. We're all on the same path. There's a whole bunch of really positive ripple effects that come from all of these things too. So while we put them in place with this specific idea or around this idea, there are also things that ripple out and help everybody else. And for a lot of businesses, there are versions of things they're already doing that we're just tweaking a little bit and saying, okay, well, this is a thing that you already have, but it's not very public. So what if we made it really public to the whole team that you do this? And then everyone gets to hook into it who needs it. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff. And that's why it's sort of individualized for every company and every business, because lots of companies have great systems in place already and some have no systems. And then it's about how do we leverage those systems to support people that are also dealing with all this emotional stuff and feeling, cognitive dissonance in their brain as their brain rewires itself, which is what the brain is busy doing when we're grieving. So it's those kinds of really practical, tangible things, as well as how do we up our emotional agility and our emotional intelligence? How do we start to, dabble with vulnerability, which we all know really is a superpower and not a weakness? How do we, for some companies, those are big cultural shifts and we can work on those. And if that's terrifying, let's start with practical support and then, build out to there.
I love that. So many good tips in there and things that we can do and just ways that we can be there to support people. So
let's say we're the person, we have the grief. We've had the loss. You haven't come in. There's not this system. You're feeling all out of sorts. Like, what are some strategies? What are some things that we can do if we experience this grief in our lives?
For me, the biggest thing is to just face it. There is no escape. Grief is a patient thing, and it will wait for you and it will rear its ugly head at some point. So for me, what I realized in the beginning, because of this weird sort of stratification of grief that we have, because I lost a child, I was going to get a lot of support and a lot of grace. And I thought, I need to grieve while I have that. That was part of my kind of selfish motivation for this conscious and curiousness that and this idea that I just needed to
Mhm.
face it and allow it to all be all right, even though it was terrifying and horrible, was that I knew I would have support, right? So for me as a griever, the biggest thing I encourage grievers to do is to just allow it, to give yourself permission. We have to give that permission to ourselves because culturally we're not given permission to grieve. There's no permission,
Mhm.
really. We're supposed to get over it, get through it, move on, get back to normal, all those awful things people say to us that
Mhm.
they hope are helpful, but they're hurtful. So you have to give yourself permission. And then I would say it's okay to advocate when you're able. And if you're not able, that's okay too. Because it's really a lot to ask someone who's in those early acute days, especially that first sort of 2 to 3 months where you're barely surviving, to have to go in and say, oh, I'm really finding this task challenging. Is there someone that can help me? That's a big ask for someone to have to go do that advocacy work for themselves. Do your best, give yourself a lot of grace. So much of it we have to give to ourselves because society doesn't yet give it to us, but we can give
Mhm.
it to ourselves. It was really important for me. And I remember saying this to my daughter in the early days. I said to her, because she was so worried about, extended family and other people. And I said, honey, like that's beautiful. And yes, I care about everybody who's impacted by this loss. And I only have the capacity to take care of myself and help take care of you. And she was 25. She's not a child. She didn't really need me to care for her, but she's still my child. So I will always care for her. And I said, really, at this point, everyone else who's involved are adults and they're all just going to have to figure it out. So to give yourself permission to take care of yourself first is actually really hard for grievers. And I saw it come up a lot around Mother's Day, where people were feeling pressured into needing to celebrate Mother's Day because other people wanted to celebrate. And I was like, nope. You get to take care of yourself first. And if what's right for you is to say, I need 2 weeks off, say it and hope for the best, right? We have to have a lot of hope and and a lot of faith that, the universe, God, whatever your belief system is, that it will rise up to support you. And really, for the most part, we are pleasantly surprised that it does. But take care of yourself first, face it, eyes wide open courage. It's a rough road and that's okay, but it can't be denied. It will wait. And I think the other thing that I want people to hear is, grief gives us a billion opportunities to make choices, little tiny choices that add up. And we get to choose how we grieve. And whether you're like me and you're grieving out loud, or you're the other end of the spectrum and you're going to grieve in private, or you're at, I don't know, now I've created a spectrum. I don't know where to go next. We'll make a triangle. If you're one of those people who just like dealt with it, had big emotions at the beginning, and now they're ready to move on and try and just have it be this little part of them that they don't really face all the time, that's okay too. You get to design your own version, but you have to give yourself permission to do that and to just dismiss everyone's advice. Their advice
I
is,
love
I had to get really clear about that. If you have not lost a child suddenly and had that middle of the night phone call from the police, I don't care what you have to say about how I should be doing this.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful advice. It's so true, right? We have to give ourselves permission to do it
Yeah.
our way and trust that we know what we need because we are all so different. We all are going to grieve differently, just the same way we all celebrate differently. We all have different
Yep.
desires, and the only thing that's coming to mind is if there are those generic people out there like I used to be prior to this conversation that are saying, hey, I'm here to help you in any way, maybe perhaps try to make a list of things that might be helpful after after you've encountered something like today's podcast, whether it's taking the trash out, mowing the lawn, weeding a garden, grocery shopping, helping with a meal, a walking partner, all of the things, and just being willing to ask for help and accept the help that's being given. And so whether someone's saying, hey, I can do this. So I think sometimes it is asking, and I talk a lot about that in careers and, just being
Yes.
spouses and moms in general, we have to get comfortable at asking for what we need in all areas of life. But I think even in these times of grief, it's like, or even if you don't know, I don't really know what I need. Maybe right now this would be helpful. And just
Yeah.
kind of throw it out there, but accept some help
Yeah.
because it's okay. And it's okay to take help. It's okay we see it as weakness when we take help. And
It's not.
taking help is not a weakness. It is like it allows other people to share their love, their gifts. It actually gives other people joy when we let them help. So it's actually giving someone joy. It's actually a gift. And so it's not a sign of weakness. Like, of course, we could all power on and do everything in our lives and we could just make it all work or figure it all out. Of course, we could do that. We can scrape through it, but that's not what God has really called us to. He's called us to community. He's called us to unity. He's called us to love. He's called us to help each other. And he knows that, in order for us to be called to help, that means that somebody needs help. And he never says in the Bible, when you need help, that means that you are weak and incapable, right? No, he says, ask for
You're
help.
supposed to
When you are
muscle
weak,
through
I
and
am
do it
strong.
yourself. Yeah.
Right? When you are weak, I am strong. So it's actually like, let him bring other people into your life that can be a blessing. Receive the blessings if you're going through that time of grief. Accept whatever that looks like, feels like for you. This is what I think I'm hearing you say here. And so
Yeah.
I just
And just
experience
to
it.
know
Lean
you're
in
not
and
supposed to do it
experience it.
alone. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're not supposed to do it alone. Grief, the one universal in this universal and unique experience is grief needs to be witnessed.
Yeah.
So if you are the kind of person that has that emotional intelligence and agility we were talking about earlier and can just go and sit with the person and bear witness and let them just be in the messy and let them cry or let them laugh or let them scream and shout or take them to a smash room or whatever they need, grief needs to be witnessed. We're not supposed to do it by ourselves. We're not supposed to. So the flip side of the direct offer is exactly what you're saying, the direct ask. And that direct ask is powerful in every relationship and every context that we're living in. So if you can use this as an opportunity to increase that direct ask muscle, it's an opportunity. And I know people struggle with thinking about, catastrophic loss and grief as an opportunity and a place we get to make choices. But that's the reality. It's going to happen to us. So how do we look at it from a new perspective? And how do we shift out of fear to a growth mindset around it, to a spot where, grief is going to change your life? It is.
Mm-hmm.
So how could you use that purposefully, with intention, with a positive intention, even in the early horror and even in those moments of desperation? You get to make a choice.
Yeah.
You can choose to reach out. You can choose to self-soothe. You can choose to, up your meditation or learn how to breathe. And, I hate all those lists of like the 8 things you should do when you're grieving. I'm like, I am just breathing through the day. And that was our rule. We got to do one hard thing. And then our whole rest of our to-do list for the day was just to breathe. So if you're at that stage of grief, your choice, when I talk about choices, I'm not talking about big choices. Your choice is do what's right for you and just breathe. And let everybody else figure it out. Everyone else is also adults. If you're dealing with children, that's a whole different conversation. But if you're surrounded by adults, they can figure it out. They're not your responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And with my mom just facing some stuff, like her sister is sick, she's lost a nephew. My mom is, or her mom is aging, all of the things. I'm even like, you should check out the grief share program. Like, go get connected to people because this stage is already hard. They have a family friend who's very, very ill. It's like, this stage is hard. And the truth is that, me, your daughter, I haven't experienced all of this. I really don't know everything to say or everything to do. I want to be there for you. But I also feel like somebody else probably has a much better perspective perspective than I do. Like, I'm here for you, but maybe perhaps having some of these conversations with people, because they might know something kind of like you do. You know way more. We've been so enlightened today. This has been such a great conversation, way more than I knew. But one of the things that comes up often, and we've talked about so many great things to say and do if somebody else is having the grief, it's not you. But we didn't address one question, because this is like, I feel like this is people's go-to, right? The how are you? How do you feel about that question? How are you? What if that's what's coming out from the heart?
I have a lot of hate on for that question, to be honest. So here's where I get stuck with how are you? I think it's become a throwaway question. And we're also using it as a transactional question, which I think is wildly problematic. So, how are you from the cashier at the grocery store? Wildly problematic. That's not an appropriate transactional interaction as far as I'm concerned. And especially for a griever, that's part of what I hated about the grocery store, to be honest, was that whole interaction with the cashier at the end. I just couldn't face it. So, how are you as a transactional question? Please stop it. Did you find everything you're looking for is a transactional question. I hope you come back again is a transactional question. How are you is a personal question. How are you in the workplace, where we're asking it as we pass in the hallway while we're still walking, and we expect the person to say fine and keep walking? Also problematic. Please stop it. Oh my gosh, you've got me on my soapbox. Here I go. Okay. So there's a whole bunch of problems with that question because of those things. It's become transactional and it's become throwaway. So then when that's what's coming from your heart, because you really care about the person and how they are in this moment and what can you do to support them, it's a problematic question because it has all that other stuff we use it for. So one of the challenges I sometimes give businesses is to have them create a space where their shared agreement is that they will only ask, how are you, when they really care about the answer, and that you're not allowed to say fine or good, but you have to actually give a genuine answer. So if what you're called to say from the heart is, how are you, because you really genuinely want to know, I would encourage you to find some slightly different language, just so that it isn't that activating question from the cashier experience and the barista experience and the person who doesn't give a whit care about you at all at work, who says, oh, how are you doing? Great, bye. And we just keep walking in the hallway. So how are you feeling? Is it a good day or a bad day? A good moment or a bad moment? There are other ways we can get at what we really want to know. So I would encourage you to finesse that question, just because it's become such a weird question for us in North America anyway. Interesting. I think about when I was in Europe a few years ago, I don't remember that question being so prevalent, but it's for sure prevalent in North America. Oh, how are you? It's like a throwaway question. And the other thing that bothers me about that is we're asking a really important question about our feelings and our emotions as a throwaway, which gives us the subtext that our feelings and our emotions are also a throwaway. And that's all wrong-headed. So how are you when you really want to know? Ask it slightly differently so it doesn't sound like that throwaway, misappropriated transactional question, because often we really do. Like, how is today? How is this moment? That's a great question. How is this moment? Because really in early grief, especially, it's moment to moment. This moment is okay. Next moment, I have no prediction. Last moment, horrifying, right? How is this moment? How are you right now? Because we just also need to stay as in the moment as we can with grief, because what just happened is probably terrible. What's coming, we can't predict. In this moment, I'm safe. In this moment, I'm okay. So nuance the languaging.
A great transition. I think it's a great transition, really, because it's very unique, because I never really thought of that as this being this transactional throwaway question that is put out there all the time. Because I do ask people, oh, how are you? And I do genuinely care. And usually people respond with, oh, I'm good, or oh, I'm fine. And I can tell that they're not. And I will challenge them. I'll be like, well, your fine doesn't quite sound so fine. So how are you really? I really, letting them know, like, I really care. And then they'll be like, yeah, I'm not. But we have been so programmed to just be fine or good or whatever the things are, that we don't there's not really this space. And most people will not even dig to that second layer to be like, if they say good, even if they know they're not good, they're like, well, I guess they don't want to talk about that. Right. But it's like we've been so trained. But yeah, so many people ask you, and you have to find yourself lying about that all the time because people are like, well, how are you? And it's like, you are the grocery store clerk. It's like, you don't
Okay,
really
you
want
don't
me like
care.
unloading on you right now. You've got this
And
line
that's what
full
I
of
would
people.
think.
Like, you don't
Careful what you
really want me
ask.
telling you how my day has been because, most of
No.
them are fantastic, but who knows with this day
Yeah.
where I am. Like this one
Yeah.
might not be so great. So
It's
it's
become so
definitely
weird.
unique. But I love that. How are you in this moment? Or even just making it something more specific.
Yeah.
Yeah. To them. So I think that just challenges us to dig a little deeper and ask something a little bit more. So, oh my goodness. Wow. Suzanne, this has just been so incredible. The time has flown by with you today. As we get ready to wrap up here today, I know you have an amazing ebook for the listeners that you're going to be telling them about, but is there anything that you wish that I would have asked or some final words of wisdom that you want to share?
I can't think of anything that we didn't cover, which is fabulous. I love when I feel that way at the end. I'm like, no, we talked about like, what do you say? What do you do? What I would say as final words of wisdom is it's okay if you feel scared because you are not alone in feeling scared. As the griever who's experiencing grief and doesn't know what's happening to them because nobody told them and we don't talk about it, as the person who's trying to show up to support someone and doesn't know what to do or say or even how to show up, if you feel like you missed the boat and now you don't know what to do and you have guilt about that and now we're all in shame-based meaning making, nobody's learning anything, it's all just a hot mess. What I would say is it's okay to feel scared. What's not okay is to let that paralyze you. So feel scared, do it anyway. Show up imperfectly. You can be brilliant and imperfect at the same time, right? And just do it anyway in a way that's from your heart, that's appropriate to you. We all on this planet have our own special magic, and that's what you need to bring to the table. So, whatever someone told you you should do, if that doesn't resonate with your special magic, don't do it. Do what's right for you to do, to offer genuine support, genuine connection. In this moment, we're all feeling so isolated and we have this epidemic of loneliness. If we can reach out in this moment where we all have so much collective grief, there's so much grief all around us. And, you and your family, you've got the collective grief, you've got the grief of actual loss, you've got the anticipatory grief for losses that are coming. There is all kinds of grief. And we have this moment where we could connect with each other and share it and start to talk about it. Think about what robust conversations you could have with trusted friends and family about what's really going on for you. If you sat down at the table and said, oh my gosh, I know this is going to feel awkward for all of us, but who's feeling some sadness today about something? Who's feeling like they lost something? Let's talk about it. Let's compare. We would find that so many of our losses are the same, that so many of our emotional responses to those losses are the same. That as we know intellectually, but we don't allow ourselves to experience, we are 99% the same and 1% different. And right now we feel 99% different and 1% the same. And we need to shift that around. And grief, weirdly, in all of its messiness and fear and overwhelm, gives us an opportunity to be really real with each other. And so I would just love for more of us to take that opportunity.
Mm. Love that. Love that so much. So why don't you go ahead and tell everybody how they can connect with you and more about your free gift?
Yeah, so the best way to find me is on my website, which is alivedexperience.com. I'm sure it will be in the show notes. So it makes perfect sense you just say it out loud. And I realize it's very hard to type. I type it all the time. I'm like, why did I choose a name with an X in it? That's just silly. But there you go. It's alivedexperience.com. And the thing you're going to look for there, if you're listening to this as most of Mary's audience, as a as a woman at work, and you want to know how you can deal with this at work, there's one page that's called Grief at Work ebook. So if you just click on that page, there's an ebook there. It's about 6 pages. It will resonate with a lot of what you heard today, but it just breaks down at a very, succinct. It's 6 pages. It's pretty succinct. Some of the things that you could offer in the workplace, some of the things that might be how grievers are presenting in the workplace, because a lot of the time the grievers won't come and say, oh, hey, I'm a griever, right? Most of us are not doing that. But there's things you can watch for to know if maybe you should offer some support. That's all set out in the ebook. I have a newsletter, so you can sign up for the newsletter. You will not be bombarded. It's every 2 weeks. That's all you're going to get from me, I promise. So that's a way to stay in touch. And the best place, the website is the best place because it also has links to Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, all the places. So it's much easier to click on those to connect if those are your places you want to stay in touch. And you can DM me, email me, all the things. I'm just so happy to get to share this conversation and open up this space and provide whatever support I can.
Wonderful. Yes, we will put all of that into the show notes so you can just check it out there. And Suzanne, who would you say has been the most influential woman mentor in your life?
So my personal, thank you for asking this question. I love sharing about brilliant women. My personal female mentor is Dr. Claire Zammit. She's the founder of Feminine Power and now the Institute for Women-Centered Coaching, Training, and Leadership. And I was connected to her before Ben died, and I feel so fortunate I was because I had already learned so much about, the growth mindset and breaking down your old stories and all of that stuff. And I really needed every skill that I had in my toolbox when I got that phone call. And she's since become a personal mentor of mine. And I'm just so grateful that I found her and connected with her amazing work around embracing our feminine and our feminine power and, really leaning into all of the gifts that gives us. And thank you for letting me have a chance to talk about her.
Absolutely. We love to lift up other women. So that is incredible. Well, thank you so much again for being an incredible guest here with us today. And listeners, thank you guys for showing up and supporting Suzanne and supporting those with grief, whether that's yourself or others, both in and outside of the workplace. I think when we share this message, we can continue to help others know how they can handle grief in a better way, something that we can all do better to show God's love. So thank you for joining us today. Until we meet again, remember, you're only one plan away from your next promotion. And God, He's not done with you.
Hey friend, thank you for listening today. Be sure to join us next week for another great episode. If you receive value from today's show, I'd appreciate it if you would leave us a 5-star review to help others learn about the show. And if you're ready to fast track your career and increase your income, impact, and joy, then head on over to maryjervich.com and check out the masterclass that teaches you how you can advance too. I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. This and so much more can be found in the show notes. I look forward to seeing you soon.